The UFC has never had a fighter quite like Khamzat Chimaev.
He's so good, and he's so focused and dedicated. Khamzat Chimaev is a fucking terrifying human being.
But his closest ally, and someone he calls his big brother, is a man the United States government has sanctioned for running one of the most brutal regimes in modern Europe. In fact, the connection got so serious that Chimaev was locked out of the US. And when Khamzat won the UFC title, it handed the same man a trophy he'd been chasing for years. Because all this time, a Chechen warlord with his own private militia has been building Chimaev into exactly the kind of fighter who could go out and win it for him. So why did he spend years building the UFC's most feared fighter? And what was he really trying to achieve? To understand that, you have to go back to a small Chechen village in May 1994. Bombed out roads, active conflict, and a poor Muslim Chechen family trying to get by with almost nothing.
And Chechnya is totally different when you grow up in the war. Diaz, he's not that close of our toughness. He was in the school, and he had the good life, he had the bread, but we didn't have that.
The first Chechen war broke out a few months after he was born, and the second started when he was 5. Two brutal wars throughout his childhood, with cities completely destroyed and hundreds of thousands of people killed or forced to move on.
Come to this world when it's World War, and yeah, it was a hard time without food, and not nice time was that.
And in the middle of all that, a 5-year-old Khamzat Chimaev was already wrestling at a local gym. In Chechen culture, fighting is tied to identity, and pretty much every boy grows up on the mats. Khamzat just happened to be better than most of them, and as a teenager, he'd already won a bronze medal at the Russian Junior National Championships.
Traditional sport in my village is wrestling. If you don't do wrestling when you're a kid, they say, like, we joke with the guys who don't come to the training, you girl, like, you know, like, yeah, you have to train wrestling, you have to be tough.
Then in 2013, he turned 18 and left the whole thing behind, moving to Sweden with his mother. He went from a war zone to sitting in Swedish government offices, trying to figure out paperwork in a language he couldn't read, with no money and no plan.
At the beginning was for me, I was young, 19, and just doesn't want to left my friends, you know, like, but when we come here, it was a small village here as well, and I didn't know somebody. We didn't have a gym as well there. 1 year it was hard for me.
But there was one gym in Stockholm that was about to change all of that. All Stars Training Center in Stockholm was home to Alexander Gustafsson and one of the best fight teams in Europe.
I was sitting upstairs and I heard a lot of noise. It sounded like some people were fighting. So I went down, I saw one guy. The guy was Khamzat, was very upset. There was 2 other guys. It looked like he wanted to rip them apart. I just asked him, like, hey, what are you doing here? He said, I want to become an MMA fighter. I said, okay, then you're gonna stay. You don't go back.
Chimaev was already tearing through the Swedish wrestling scene, winning national freestyle titles 3 years in a row from 2016 to 2018, often just straight up destroying his opponents.
One guys who I win against, a lot of guys who I win against, they've been in competition, world champion, championship, and one guy been in Olympic Games too. I win against these guys, and I win like 10-0, you know, like you can't win against somebody better in wrestling. 10-0 is over. The guy was in the Olympic championship. I couldn't even because of papers.
And somehow, in the middle of that run, in 2017, he walked into All Stars Training Center in Stockholm and started training MMA properly alongside his wrestling career. Gustafsson was high on him right from the beginning.
He just popped up to the gym and he did his thing there, and yeah, we all were like,
holy crap, who is this guy?
But even with that kind of praise from one of the biggest names in European MMA, Chimaev was still broke, still unknown, and still a long way from anything resembling a proper career.
He's like a heavyweight, strong as a heavyweight, fast like a lightweight.
He turned pro in 2018, and started running through regional promotions like Brave CF, finishing almost everyone inside a round. He told Swedish press he'd been the UFC one day, but honestly, nobody outside that basement had a clue what was being built down there. The moment the UFC called, the entire sport was about to find out. Summertime expenses in 2026 are stacking up faster than ever, from those pricey family vacations and record gas prices to looming tuition and camp fees. For many of us, it feels like the only option is swiping the credit card, leaving you trapped in a cycle of high-interest debt. Homeowners, American Financing has a way out. This isn't about shortcuts. It's a real strategic plan to reset your finances and reclaim your budget. At American Financing, they specialize in building plans tailored specifically to your goals. They look at your current debt and show you exactly how your home's equity can work smarter for you. Imagine rolling that high-interest debt into one simple, manageable monthly payment. There are no upfront fees and zero pressure, just honest advice from a salary-based consultant. On average, their customers are saving $800 a month. That's real breathing room. Start today and you may even be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. American Financing, America's home for home loans. 866-891-7332. That's 866-891-7332 or americanfinancing.net/markfighting. In July 2020, Chimaev was flown out to Fight Island in Abu Dhabi for his debut against John Phillips. He submitted Phillips in the second round and walked out with a performance of the night bonus on his very first appearance.
This guy is one of the most special fighters I've ever seen, if not the most special guy.
Then, just 10 days later, he was back in the cage again against Rhys McKee, beating him down inside a round and breaking the record for the quickest turnaround between UFC wins in the modern era.
Congratulations, obviously 2 wins in 10 days, a UFC record for victories. I mean, what's the emotion like for you after these 2 wins?
I feel amazing, like I said 10 days before. I'm also happy to be here, make history. If they have some history, just tell me, I'm gonna take this.
2 fights in 10 days, both finishes, with barely a strike landed on him across either one. And then 2 months after that, he made the entire sport stop and pay attention. In September 2020, he fought Gerald Meerschaert, a veteran with over 40 pro fights and a reputation for surviving everyone. Chimaev walked him down, threw one straight right hand, and knocked him out cold in 17 seconds. Overnight, Khamzat Chimaev went from new Swedish prospect to the scariest name in the division.
2 years I'm become a famous fighter in the world. And who talks about Conor now? Nobody. Who talks about Khabib now? Nobody. He's finished. Conor finished. Everyone finished. Who's the famous fighter? It's me. I'm gonna take the belts and we're gonna get that. I'm believing that.
Dana White called him the most exciting prospect he'd seen in years, and the UFC started fast-tracking his path to the title immediately. By the end of 2020, Chimaev had absorbed fewer total strikes across his entire UFC run than most fighters take in a single round, and his BJJ coach was telling reporters he was one of the best fighters he'd ever seen.
The hunger I see on Khamzat and the dedication that he had, the focus that he had, I believe that he could win the belt today. I believe that.
At that point, Chimaev thought he was just fighting his way into the UFC. But the truth was, his performances were so loud, so dominant, and so unavoidable that he'd also been auditioning for somebody else. Someone sitting in a palace in Grozny who'd been looking for exactly this kind of fighter for years. That someone was Ramzan Kadyrov, and by late 2020, he was publicly claiming Chimaev as a Chechen son.
This is Ramzan Kadyrov, whose security forces are accused of abduction and torture, with gay men among their recent targets. Here in Chechnya, he's greeted like a czar.
He sent a ton of gifts, from a Mercedes-Benz to open invitations back to Grozny.
He surprised you with a Mercedes-Benz?
Yeah, actually I gave him 3 times.
3 Benzes?
Three Benzes?
Yeah.
But as well as that, there were also a steady stream of photo ops designed to link the two of them together in public. For most fans, that name might not ring any alarm bells, but it probably should.
I think there is no denying that Ramzan Kadyrov is a very controversial figure in the world, Some might call him a dictator. As you said, his past, very checkered, very controversial, and I'm being very kind and choosing my words wisely.
Ramzan Kadyrov was appointed head of Chechnya by Vladimir Putin back in 2007, and he's run the republic ever since, backed by his own private militia. He's been sanctioned by the United States since 2017 for everything from torture to forced disappearances, and a lot worse. Human Rights Watch describes Chechnya under his rule as a tyranny, and the US State Department has publicly named him as responsible for gross human rights violations over more than a decade. But alongside all that, Kadyrov also runs the Akhmat MMA Machine, a personal fight project named after his assassinated father, built to project Chechen power on the world stage. And for Akhmat to actually matter globally, the project needed a real star. Not just a regional champion or a decent contender, but a genuine, undeniable, global name in combat sports. Chimaev, the hottest prospect in the UFC, was exactly what Kadyrov had been waiting for.
I am hearing things about Khamzat that are truly terrifying. As I said, Darren Till's out there. I've got a bunch of friends out there in Sweden. They're filming. Blockhouse is a company that I'm involved with. And they are calling me up and saying, holy shit, Khamzat is the real deal.
But right as the relationship started to form, Chimaev's career nearly ended. In December 2020, he caught COVID-19 and the recovery was brutal. He was coughing up blood in training, in and out of hospital, and struggling to breathe months after the infection.
That time was hard, man. It's not the same, man. When I'm healthy, you know, that time when I said that, doctor said to me, coming there, you have a cancer, man. That's why I'm said I'm retired, man. I didn't know what to say to my family. I didn't know what to say to the people, man.
Then in March 2021, a post appeared on his Instagram. "Thank you," he wrote. "I think I'm done." Within days of the retirement post, Kadyrov stepped in directly and publicly called Chimaev back to Chechnya. He told the press that all Chechen people were upset by the news, that the young people of the republic were pinning their hopes on Chimaev's victories, and that he personally would not let him walk away. And just like that, Chimaev was on a plane back to Grozny, and a few days later, the retirement was over. Chimaev said that when he broke down, it was Kadyrov who brought him back and told him he'd become champion one day.
He called me, what's wrong on? I said, they said maybe cancer, maybe not. He said, no, you're not cancer, come on, come back home and we help you. And then you're gonna go, promise me just I'm gonna help you with being healthy. Promise me you come back to the cage. I said, okay, brother, we do it.
By October 2021, he was back in the octagon, submitting Li Jingliang in the first round at UFC 267 and picking up another performance of the night bonus. But the relationship with Kadyrov was only just getting started. By the time 2022 rolled around, Chimaev wasn't just a fighter Kadyrov supported from a distance, he was inside the circle. By early 2022, Chimaev was personally training Kadyrov's teenage sons, Ali and Adam, even flying them out to Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand to sharpen up their game. And in May 2022, when Chimaev got married in Chechnya, Kadyrov himself attended the ceremony. Footage went viral of Kadyrov himself sparring with Chimaev, with the Chechen leader out-wrestling him and locking up a submission on camera. There's also a clip of Chimaev pretending to be knocked out by one of Kadyrov's young sons during a sparring session, selling it like he'd genuinely been hurt. Both videos were clearly staged for the cameras, and both played right into the image Kadyrov wanted: a global UFC star who could still be humbled by him and his own family. But the same year, Chimaev was also there during a live stream where Kadyrov actually threatened to end someone just for criticizing his rule.
Я найду тебя, да, и мы посмотрим, да, кто из нас шайтан. Ты самому тебе как, да, не стыдно, как ты будешь смотреть в зеркало, да. Ты ночами не будешь спать, да, будешь сейчас завещание делать, если я умру, помогите моей семье, да. Я очень много шайтанов там.
And Khamzat stayed completely silent about it. Meanwhile, in the UFC, his star was getting bigger and bigger. In April 2022 at UFC 273, Chimaev beat Gilbert Burns over 3 rounds in his first real UFC test, winning a unanimous decision in a fight of the night and cementing himself as a legitimate welterweight contender. If anyone ever thought he was just hype, this was the moment that ended it. But just 5 months later in Las Vegas, the fight that was supposed to turn him into a full-blown superstar ended up becoming a complete disaster. In September 2022, Chimaev was booked to headline UFC 279 against Nate Diaz at welterweight with a 171-pound limit for the main event. He stepped down the scale at 178.5 pounds, missing weight by a ridiculous 7.5 pounds on one of the biggest fight weeks of the year.
Khamzat weighed in 8.5 pounds overweight, and he fucked up the entire main event because he was supposed to be fighting Nate. He's supposed to be fighting Nate Diaz.
The entire card had to be reshuffled hours before the show, with Diaz getting moved across to fight Tony Ferguson and Chimaev being rebooked against Kevin Holland at a 180-pound catch weight instead. UFC officials came out and said doctors had ordered him to stop cutting due to health issues, and Dana White publicly backed that version of events to try and protect his biggest rising star.
He was cutting weight. If you saw him yesterday, he was very, very lean already, and he should have come in on weight. He started to cut weight, and he started locking up and cramping and all the things that happen when you're bad, that are from a bad cut. And unlike 10 years ago when we were doing this, they call in, we send a doctor up, and the doctor determines whether he should keep cutting weight or not, and the doctor told him he shouldn't.
But footage went around of Chimaev laughing and shrugging at the scale like it was no big deal, and the reaction from the MMA world was absolutely brutal. He went out and submitted Kevin Holland inside a round without absorbing a single meaningful strike. It was a dominant win again, but the story coming out of that week wasn't the finish, it was the mess he made getting there. And what he didn't realize was that the door back into America was about to slam shut behind him. Back in December 2020, the US Treasury had already sanctioned Kadyrov's MMA infrastructure, including Akhmat MMA, ACA, and the Akhmat Kadyrov Foundation, describing them in the paperwork as sources of his pride and significant profit. Then in late September 2022, just weeks after UFC 279, the State Department rolled out fresh visa restrictions on hundreds of Russian nationals tied to the invasion of Ukraine. Chimaev's coach, Alan Nascimento, said it himself not long after, admitting that between the war, the Russian passport, and being Chechen, traveling anywhere had become a nightmare, and traveling to America was nearly impossible. For context, Tyson Fury has been blocked from entering the US for years over a single photo with Daniel Kinahan, a sanctioned drug boss, and that ban even extended to members of his family. Chimaev's relationship with Kadyrov was more than that. It was years of training, weddings, cornering his kids, and sparring together. The UFC wanted Chimaev to headline UFC 300, but he couldn't get into the country, so the biggest card in the UFC history went ahead without him. In October 2023, he beat Kamaru Usman in Abu Dhabi. A year later, he submitted Robert Whittaker with a face crank, and Kadyrov hoisted him onto his shoulder afterwards.
He does it to everybody. Everybody he gets a hold of, he just ragdolls. Even like really elite wrestlers. It's very extraordinary. His talent is undeniable. And Robert Whittaker, like seeing him breaking Robert Whittaker's jaw just by squeezing across his face. Apparently Robert Whittaker had a broken jaw when he was a child, and he had it work done, but it's always been vulnerable. Like his front teeth had been pushed in before. In the Drekas Duplessis fight, he had a problem with it as well, apparently. But this was different because this was like Chimaev got the blade of his forearm across the jaw, and it was like just crushing those teeth, and it goes into his mouth. You saw the photo?
Yeah.
What it looks like?
Yeah, man.
Now he was 14-0, one of the most feared fighters in the world, with a title shot in hand, but he had no way into the country where most UFC titles are decided. Only one kind of person could fix a problem that big. And in November 2024, that person won an election. In November 2024, Donald Trump won the presidential election, and all throughout the campaign, the UFC popped up a lot. Dana White spoke at the Republican National Convention, UFC fighters have been vocal Trump supporters, and the relationship between the promotion and the incoming administration was as tight as it had ever been. By 2025, Chimaev suddenly had a US visa, and in an interview shortly after, he actually credited Donald Trump directly for making it happen.
It wasn't my fault, you know. I didn't have everyone, you know, so I didn't have the visa to US. That's why I didn't fight only once in Abu Dhabi. So now Donald Trump here, so we go for a fight.
In Chimaev's view, the US president himself had personally cleared the way for a fighter whose closest ally was sanctioned for human rights crimes because the UFC needed him on the card. UFC 319 in Chicago was the first time Chimaev had fought on American soil in almost 3 years.
The boogeyman, you're going to see him break. You're going to see him break in there. And then realize there's only one boogeyman, and that's me.
Kadyrov's sons, who'd been cornering him for years, were barred from entering the country under the same sanctions that had blocked Chimaev himself. He walked out to a song by a Chechen musician whose work is on Russia's own list of extremist materials played live on American television. Then he went out and beat Dricus du Plessis, landing 12 takedowns and setting a brand new UFC record for total strikes in a single fight with 529, breaking Max Holloway's previous mark.
Khamzat Chimaev just did exactly what he wanted to do. His pace, his pressure, his control, his cardio, everything looked on point tonight. He looked more prepared than he's ever been in his entire career, and his whole career has been impressive.
He dedicated the belt to Adam Kadyrov, Ramzan's 17-year-old son, live on American TV. 4 days later, he was back in Grozny, handing that same belt to the man America calls a war criminal. The UFC didn't just build Khamzat Chimaev, Ramzan Kadyrov built him too, and now the belt belongs to both of them. And while Chimaev's been built into a champion through all the people around him, there's another UFC star whose rise makes absolutely no sense at all. Alex Pereira came into the UFC late, was written off a ton of times, and somehow turned himself into one of the most dominant champions the sport has ever seen. To find out how he broke every rule about what's possible in the UFC, check out this video next. Thanks for watching.